First, there is a mountain. Then there is no mountain. And then there is. You may have heard this before, or maybe not. I don't know. It depends on whether you grew up in this hippie mindset like I did, right? Well, Donovan, who was a musician from the 1960s, 70s, and on, he's still alive. He had a hit single. Well, basically, he had a couple songs. Mellow Yellow was one of them, which is a term a lot of people know, but he wasn't exactly well known for his great songwriting skills by a lot of people, and underrated. Some people talked about compared him to how some of his songs to Bob Dylan's and how they sounded too similar. And that's for another time. I was going to talk about the similarity of music and how we're all influenced by one another. But what I really wanted to discuss here was that particular saying in that song. This actually goes way back to old Zen teachings and an old Zen saying. And back in 1967, when the song was produced, most of the people of the time probably had no clue. There were very few people who had studied that type of, information as far as Zen teachings, and probably hadn't heard the quote at the time. What does it mean? Let's just say the idea in the song, which starts with, I think it believed the first line is, "The lock upon my garden gates, a snail, that's what it is. The lock upon my garden gates, a snail, that's what it is." And another line says, "Caterpillar sheds the skin to find the butterfly within." Now this was referring to this awakening or enlightenment of the time in the 60s. It was a very popular gesture to try to find that kind of, Satori. And the most fascinating part of it all is, well, I'd like to read you a couple of lines first from an article just to kind of further explain it, because I tend to ramble. It says, a famous historical Zen teacher named Kingguan Weixin had a saying. So, at the first level on the path, he saw mountains as mountains and rivers as rivers. On the second level of the path, he saw that mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. And at the third level, he saw once again mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. And a further point, these are just a couple screenshots so I could remember my point. It says, first stage, our feet are firmly planted on the ground. Second stage, we have our heads in the clouds. Third stage, we learn how to do both. This represents understanding. As the Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. When we have key insights into the nature of reality, we dwell in the world of emptiness and the world of form. We come to realize the truth. We've been doing that the whole time. And what this means, in essence, at least to me, because I've heard a couple of different interpretations of this line, and one person said, well, the mountain could be seen as a challenge in life. You could say, well, first there's a mountain, and then you get over that mountain, and there's no mountain, and then there's another one that you have to climb. I believe this is a completely mistaken interpretation. The one I read, basically, is the one that I believe, or at least that the line of thinking that I go along with. The stages of enlightenment is basically what it is. And it's first when you see the mountain as a mountain. And this means that you see things for what they are. The second stage would be when you start to see the deeper meanings of things, the interconnected nature. You realize that the mountains exist because of the rivers. And the rivers wouldn't exist without the mountains. And there becomes this unfolding and awakening of awareness within your soul that you just cannot define to anyone. A lot of people let it go to their head to the point where they believe that they are, super enlightened people, and they are, but that's not the point. You don't brag about your awareness. You just realize, holy shit, none of us know anything. And some people, when they discover that, oh my God, that everything is connected, they really grasp for some sort of a belief system to try to incorporate all those thoughts together. This is where religion comes from. This is also where all New Age and occult comes from. It's all bullshit. The truth is, none of us really know. And this is my opinion, and I'm sure somebody's already hitting that dislike button right now because I'm talking about it. But I don't believe that any particular denomination has a clue. Now, a few years ago, let me back up for a second. I don't mean they don't have a clue. I just mean that the stories don't really represent they're a literal interpretation of a metaphoric feeling or an unfolding of the universe, if you will. And I read this article a while back about how in the 1800s, or the late 1700s, the Christians who had entered Japan were trying to convince the people there that the world was round. And the people there said, no, the world is flat. And for decades, they got into various debates, and they even had a panel where they had these scientists and then Japanese scholars debating whether the Earth was flat and round. Does this sound familiar? The reason I'm bringing this up is because of how important it is. The idea that we live in this illusion and nobody can really know the truth, that we can never prove anything is really real or not, comes down to the shape of our own planet. Even though we can see the cosmos, everything tends to be spherical. For some reason, the Earth is a frisbee. And this can be traced back to belief systems. And just like within... the interesting thing is back in in the days of geocentricity, when we believed the Earth was at the center of the universe, there was a lot of resistance to people like Galileo who wanted to prove heliocentricity. And people were imprisoned, and the telescope was even suppressed for over 100 years because of the fear that it would, undermine the church, if you will. Which was the irony that a couple centuries later, the church had finally agreed that the Earth was a sphere, and they were arguing with Japanese Buddhists. It's pretty fascinating. Actually, the story I'd like to read sometime. I don't really have the time right now or want to spend the time to do it, but there was a couple of screenshots I took of a site I was reading a while back. It talks about this whole different, basically how they said, well, no man's ever seen this mountain. Because in Buddhism, it wasn't just about the shape of the earth. In Buddhism, there's a belief in a mountain. This mountain has 4 sides. One is lapis, one is gold, so on and so forth. And once we had circumnavigated the globe, or ran around the disk, whatever you want to believe, we discovered that there was no such mountain that we could find yet. And it was supposed to be, this centerpiece of Buddhism. And so one time the Dalai Lama was asked about it. I believe the 14th, I don't recall. But he said that it wasn't an issue. He said perhaps the Buddha was wrong. Or perhaps the original teaching was just mistaken. That's the difference, is that Buddhism was actually willing to bend and change their beliefs to suit new discoveries over time, like most of us are. And so the point being, we see these realities, and then we start to see these, have this awareness of the world around us that we can't explain to other people, and it can take on a religious context, which is wonderful, in my opinion, as long as it doesn't lead to persecution of others, which is what so much religion has brought. And I know I might be pressing that issue of religion here, but the original teaching was Zen. And the beautiful thing about Zen is, as one guy stated it, pardon me, he says, once you've studied Zen, you realize that nobody should ever study it, because all it does is puts you back at stage 1. In other words, this is the perfect metaphor. Zen, the mountain being gone. It's this realization that you see the mountain for a mountain, then you realize everything is different. Things are an illusion. We are all one. Everything is one. And you have your head in the clouds for a while, and you live in maybe a cerebral state where you believe you're totally enlightened, and you're, wow, I'm totally into this, and I get it, and I understand the universe, and some people even take it to the point of talking down on others because they're not enlightened enough, and then all of a sudden, you get to the 3rd stage, what I would call the 3 steps to truth, which is you have to go through that stage to get to the point where you go, wait a minute, but a mountain is a mountain. You can physically go there. You can look at it. You can climb it. And next year when you go back, that fucking mountain's still going to be there. All right? Pardon the language. But the point that we decide to say everything's an illusion and nothing's for sure, and atoms are mostly empty space, therefore nothing is real, doesn't make a difference. You realize no matter how much ether is out there, no matter how many layers of reality there are, whether there's heavens and hells, does not matter at this moment. And this is where we get to the now. The now, the right now. It's the moment I try to remember. Doesn't mean that we can forget about our future and past. We always have to keep that in mind. Because that stupid old saying, you use the past to... You use the lessons from your past to operate better in the present so you can have a better future. It's very simple. And if we're not learning from our mistakes, we don't get anywhere. But the point being, we have enlightenment at our fingertips. The true enlightenment, in my opinion, is the awareness that we have to be able to function with other people, having community, having comfort, understanding. It doesn't mean that you abandon your frustrations or that you don't speak out when you see problems. You can still get angry, you can still be sad. Life is what it is. And here we are. And so those are the lessons I've been taught. Perhaps that might help somebody else out there. Excuse me. Congested a little bit. When I make these videos, I just hope that it will reach maybe one person out there who's at the stage where this particular video, the people who have gone through this awareness and this kind of, call it whatever you want. It's an awakening of the soul. And once you've processed it for not a couple days or a couple weeks or months, but years of study, you start to realize none of it really matters. But you still have to go through it. Think of it as school. Processing every religion, every theory, every idea, getting into science, geology, understanding the world around you. You can spend 10, 20, 30 years studying these things, hopefully your whole life, but after a certain point, you say, well, what really matters is making the most of this moment. And how many overachievers do we have in today's society? This hashtag world. Hashtag work is everything, where people want to work 60, 80 hours a week and they brag about bringing home these huge paychecks when they have a family that they never see. We have our priorities wrong in a lot of ways. What we have right now is what's important. The mountain is right in front of us. So that's all I got for now. Thanks for listening. I appreciate everybody's comments. The new year's upon us, so maybe this next year a few of you will decide to become my patrons, because honestly, I try to keep this channel alive through motivation alone, but at a point I become burned out on it, and I would love to make it a full-time job because I could put all my time and love into it. But we'll see if that ever happens. I'm not very pushy when it comes to those things, but I have no shame in mentioning it at the end of the year here. So, and thanks to all my patrons I do have. And please leave a comment as to your thoughts. As always, I appreciate them all. I really do. So, peace and love to you and yours. Hope you have a good holiday, whatever it may be. And have a good New Year's. Party hard. Because that mountain will be gone tomorrow. And then it'll be back. Later.